The Psalm of the Thunderstorm that Jim just read, and provides us with what we can learn about God, what a thunderstorm teaches us about God. And of course, we just saw a major storm, come through our area that did some significant destruction. In fact, it made the national news. There was a whole warehouse area in Louisville that just totally, blew, apart too. There's a symphony that some know. I don't know how many of you have, ever listened to some of the symphonies that Beethoven, wrote. And one of them is it's usually the Symphony Number 6, and it's sometimes known as the Pastoral Symphony. And the fourth movement of that symphony is in F minor. And again, I don't really know much about music, but I think F minor is kind of this kind of sad, kind of that sad, tone, grieving tone that's involved. So that fourth movement depicts a violent thunderstorm with painstaking realism. But it begins, with building from just a few drops of rain to a great climax with thunder, lightning, high winds, and sheets of rain. And the storm, though, and that's part of our symphony, the storm eventually passes with an occasional peal of thunder still heard in the distance. Well, Psalm 29 deals with the power of God revealed in nature, and by way of application, points to the power that is available from God to his people in their journey if they respond with faith, with reliance upon him. A thunderstorm reveals the power and majesty of Yahweh, which is the name that God uses in the Old Testament, to speak of himself and to speak further about his attributes. And Jesus is in many ways may be recognized as the Yahweh of the Old Testament in his pre-incarnate existence. God, Yahweh, sits enthroned over all the forces of nature. And he gives power and peace to his people. And we'll see that's the note that the Psalm of the Thunderstorm ends with. Now, scientists calculate that a typical thunderstorm, not even the kind of great or major storm that's described by David here, a typical thunderstorm releases about 10 million kilowatt hours of energy. That's the equivalent of a 20 kiloton nuclear warhead. So storms are still examples of the massive power of God. So seeing and hearing a violent storm, such as we had in our area just a few days ago, is an awesome experience that quite naturally turns one's thoughts to God. So let me give you a summary of the psalm as a whole, and we're going to kind of work our way through it. But as a summary of the entire psalm, it can be put this way. Having witnessed the awesome manifestations of the Lord's power in a terrifying thunderstorm over Lebanon and Syria, the psalmist calls upon the angelic hosts to glorify him who sovereignly rules over nature, displaying his ability to give power and peace to his people. So it begins with a call to praise. The psalmist calls upon the angelic host to glorify Yahweh in holy array. I'll read it again, verses 1 and 2. Give unto the Lord, O you mighty ones. Give unto the Lord glory and strength. Give unto the Lord the glory due to his name. Worship the Lord in the beauty of holiness. So the first two verses here of the Psalms are a call to praise. It's a call to attribute glory to Yahweh, and which is befitting his character and his reputation. And the call is put in the form of a climactic parallelism. 3 lines are similar, but the fourth changes to make an important qualification. Ascribe to the Lord. Ascribe to the Lord. Ascribe to the Lord. Worship the Lord in holy array. So the psalmist calls upon the angelic host, all you holy ones, all you mighty ones. The call is addressed to the sons of the mighty. The expression probably is similar to this, to that which we find in Job 2:1 about the sons of God. Here, the mighty ones, they are to ascribe glory and strength to him. They ought to ascribe to him the glory that is due his name. So the call is to give God the praise that is befitting his name or his nature. And everything about the nature of God deserves praise, especially his strength, his supernatural power. So in this psalm, that strength will be experienced in his sovereign control of nature. So he calls on the angel not only to ascribe to him the glory, but to worship him in holy array. So the psalmist here again, it's a psalm of David. He's calling on the hosts of heaven to praise the name of Yahweh. They are to worship Yahweh in holy array. So the language, even to the expression holy array, the language is descriptive, first of all, of priests who were to array themselves for service in the sanctuary, in the tabernacle, in the temple. The priests were to put on pure white linens to signify holiness and purity to Yahweh. So in the heavenly courts, because what we have here are two settings, really what's happening in the heavenly courts, and what we know as the third heaven, where God has chosen to be with the angelic hosts. And now it's also paradise, where every believer of all ages, go to be. And this is the case until Christ returns to establish his throne in heaven, and there's a new heaven and a new earth and new Jerusalem. But now in the heavenly courts, those worshiping Yahweh are described as arrayed with priestly clothes for the unending service to Yahweh. And those are both believers now of all ages who are there, and all of the angels who worship Yahweh. But the point here is that praise is appropriate for Yahweh. It has to be from those who are arrayed in the holiness that is necessary for the heavenly sanctuary. And of course, which all believers have because of their identification with Jesus, having been declared righteous in him. And ultimately, as we are ultimately transformed or resurrected and glorified, we'll have special clothing also that reflect the rewards that we receive from him. But the point here in these opening verses is that God deserves to be praised by his servants and for his majestic power. So that's the call to praise. Now he's going to draw out the cause for praise, the call to praise, and now the causes for praise that we'll see in verses 3 through 9. And again, I'll just make a summary statement, and then we'll go over the three portions of this cause for praise. But the psalmist David describes Yahweh's all-powerful control of nature in a terrifying storm over Lebanon and Syria. And the psalm so now gives the reason for the call to praise, Yahweh's all-powerful control of nature by his word. In verse 3, we'll begin. The voice of the Lord is over the waters. The God of glory thunders. The Lord is over many waters. So again, a tremendous thunderstorm that sweeps across the land, and David's going to trace its path and development each step of the way, attributing it to the voice of Yahweh. In these verses 3 to 9, the voice of Yahweh is repeated, guess how many times? 7 times. The voice of Yahweh. The voice of Yahweh. I'm not going to say it 7 times, but you have it, and we'll follow it here. But overall, the section breaks down into 3 parts. The rise of the storm in its fury in verses 3 to 4 and 4, the full voice of the storm in verses 5 through 7, and then the passing of the storm into the desert area in verses 8 and 9. But let's begin. He attributes the rise of the storm to the voice of Yahweh. So I read verse 3. Let me go on to verse 4. The voice of the Lord is powerful. The voice of the Lord is full of majesty. But again, verse 3 was, the voice of the Lord is over the waters. So this section begins with that. The statement, the voice of the Lord is over the waters. The voice was commanding the elements of nature, causing the storm by his word to develop and then die out. And Yahweh spoke the thunderstorm into existence. And the path of the storm is from the waters, then inland to Lebanon and Syria. So this means that waters is reference to what? What are the waters in this? It's the Mediterranean, the ocean, the sea that is there, where the storm arises to the great sea. And verse 4 affirms the might and the majesty of Yahweh. God brings up the storm by his majestic word. And then the psalmist speaks of what he has witnessed. He witnesses the voice of Yahweh in the height of the storm, verses 5 through 7. And you can see where it's going to be moving inland here. Rises in the ocean, in the Mediterranean Sea, and then moves inland. The voice of the Lord breaks the cedars. Yes, the Lord splinters the cedars of Lebanon. He makes them also skip like a calf. Lebanon and Syrian like a young wild ox. The voice of the Lord divides the flames of fire. So verse 5, the voice of Yahweh now breaks the cedars into pieces. These are the pride of Lebanon. But the storm that Yahweh caused overpowers them, uprooting them, breaking them with the fierce wind that drives the storm. And then we're told, verse 5, the voice of Yahweh quakes the great mountains. Verse 6 describes the earthquake, in essence, that occurred with this in poetic form. He makes them to skip. Provides a comparison here for the shifting ground. Lebanon and Syrian are two mountains of mountain regions just north of Israel. Mount Syrian refers to Mount Hermon there. So it's moved inland. And the voice of Yahweh, verse 7, is kind of, at first, to understand the imagery, we have to pause. The voice of the Lord divides the flames of fire. These are the flames of fire. It's a poetic description of forked lightning. The voice of the Lord splits out hues of flames of fire. So God's powerful word causes the storm to rage. Then verse 8, he's going to attribute the passing of the storm then to Yahweh. But there's many things that still will remain. And he's going to, in poetic form, describe the passing of the storm, but the devastation still that it left behind. So let me read verses 8 and 9. The voice of the Lord shakes the wilderness. The Lord shakes the wilderness of Kadesh. The voice of the Lord makes the deer give birth and strips the forests bare. And in his temple, everyone says, glory. So here the storm passes over the mountains into the eastern wilderness where it dies out. And the location here is called the wilderness of Kadesh. And the name does not refer to Kadesh Barnea in the south. That's a different Kadesh. If you remember, that's where the spies had returned, and with 10 with a bad report, 2 with a good report and everything, and they failed to go into the land, trusting God initially to do that. But that's not that area. Kadesh is another area. This is Kadesh. It's on a river, on the Orontes River, that is again to the northwest to the northeast of Israel But this is where the passing of the storm goes. And as it does, the voice of Yahweh shakes the wilderness, and the wilderness is a way of referring to the flora and to the fauna, the plants, the trees, and the animals. Now they are affected. So as the effects of the storm, we're told that about the deer, and you might have wondered, what does that have to do with it? The voice of the Lord makes the deer to give birth. Well, what indicates is that the does gave birth prematurely to their fawns. That was part of the effect of the storm upon those, the animal kingdom in essence. And the deer is brought up just as an example of how the animal kingdom was affected there. But again, it's repeated. The storm stripped the forests bare. All then, that's the scene on the ground, we might say, on earth. But then it shifted again to the heavenly temple. And in the heavenly temple, what do the heavenly host say? Glory. Glory to God. All creatures in the heavenly courts shout glory to Yahweh at the demonstration of his power. So the heavenly hosts praise God. Everything in his temple says glory. Now when you get to the book of Revelation, that happens often too. The scene shifts between what's happening on earth and to the heavenly courts, and what the angels are saying, and what the believers, even who are martyred throughout the tribulation period, what they say, as they are there in the heavenly, at that time of the great demonstration of God's power and judgment upon the earth. To glorify God means to extend his reputation by praise. And that means declaring that he alone is the sovereign. He is the Lord of all nature. So here God's powerful word causes the storm to subside. God is to be praised for his control of nature by his powerful word. Now we come to the conclusion of the matter, in the psalm. The psalmist in verses 10 to 11 declares that Yahweh rules over all nature, and he is able to share his strength and his peace with his people. So let me read verses 10 to 11 and then go through the text and comment upon it. The Lord sat enthroned at the flood, and the Lord sits as king forever. The Lord will give strength to his people. The Lord will bless his people with peace. Let's begin with verse 10. The psalmist alludes to the flood. He sat in authority at the flood. What flood? Well, I was way back, with Noah and the antediluvian people, pre-flood. The judgment that came there, the rains that came, the fountains of the deep that broke up, and the flood over all of the earth. Yahweh sat in authority at the flood. So in addition to the description of Yahweh's demonstrating his power and glory in Canaan, that storm that we just witnessed, in its rising and in its peak, and then it's going away and dissipating. So the psalmist David recalls the greatest demonstration of God's power and majesty, the flood in the book of Genesis chapters 6 through 8. And then the next column expands the idea from the flood to all time. Yahweh sits as king forever, including now, in our time, in our experience. The Lord sits enthroned as king forever. So David here envisions Yahweh's sovereign control over all nature, now in a universal event, and now in a universal event with the flood, and now in a localized storm with David, but a localized storm with us. What swept through our area last Tuesday morning. God reigns over all nature. But verse 11, I'll read it again. Yahweh will give strength to his people. Yahweh will bless his people with peace. So God reigns over all nature. Now, what happened at the ark? After all of that happened, and then you may remember there's still the dove that Noah sent out and came, and how this dove with an olive branch has become a universal symbol now of peace. But still, we have to understand in the context of God's judgments and God's blessing of his people. So drawing upon the description of the movement of the storm, David now expresses the lesson for the people of God. Because Yahweh displays his strength by bringing up a fierce storm, he is to be praised for his strength. And he grants that strength to his people as well. The power of God is available as a resource for the people of God, ultimately to overcome the world. And in this life, the life to come, the kingdom, to come, of course, ultimately, in the new heaven and in the new earth. But in our life experience, we can ask for his strength. We can ask for his wisdom. We can have his peace as well. The one who caused the storm to cease can give peace to his people. Yahweh can command the storm to die out in the wilderness. He can give peace to his people. There's no fear in life that he cannot calm. So God meets the needs of his people. He's able to bless his people with strength and with peace. So if I bring it all together once more, God displays his majestic power and perfect peace in nature and makes them available to his people, who with the angels in heaven should praise him and worship him in holiness too. So arrayed in holiness, the saints on earth join the company of angels and archangels, cherubim and seraphim in heaven to offer endless praise to the one who is worthy to receive praise. For by his powerful word, he not only created everything, but he sustains it. And we read in Hebrews, I think it's Hebrews 1 verse 3, that it's Jesus who sustains all things and continues to sustain all things. The New Testament in many ways identifies Jesus as the Yahweh of the Old Testament. And specifically with reference to the subject of this psalm, to Psalm 29, because Jesus demonstrated the same power over all creation. In the New Testament, we read of Jesus calming what? Calming the storm that he had sent the disciples across the Sea of Galilee while he stood at the land, went up to pray, and then joined them at a storm that was raging, and they were so much in fear. And what did he do? He calmed the storms. They were amazed, right? Who is this? The wind and the waves do what? Obey him. The voice of who? Of Yahweh, of the Lord. He did more. He changed water into wine, and of course, there's the other account of walking on water, too, and calling Peter to Peter says, if that's you, Lord, call me out. And Jesus calls him out, and he gets out of the boat. He walks on water. But then what happens? He turns his head off
Jesus under his circumstances.
Right, up on the wind and the waves, and he starts to sink. But what did he say? Help. And that's kind of what I was saying. Tuesday morning when Jim and I, and John was, I think Carlos was first on the scene. He called you, he called John, and then I was teaching, and John left a message. I called, and then I went down there. Jim joined us and everything, and we looked, just help. What do we do, too? But no, Jesus does what for Peter? He reaches out, grabs him, by the hand and says, "Oh, you have little faith. Why? Why did you doubt?" And all. So that Jesus used such acts to authenticate his claim to be the Lord of heaven and earth, and it's to this same Lord that believers look for power and for peace, throughout their lives. So what's the life application? Well, this is a great psalm to read in stormy weather, isn't it? And during the storm, God gives strength to his people. After the storm, he gives peace. And along with the angels in the heavenly courts, what do? We glorify God in and out of the storm.